Micronesia half a day away, whoa, ray. Pugun pugun kasakasay. Micronesia, place I long to be. Ah, yeah. She showed me island, coconut style. Show me banana, show me the way. Micronesia, place I long to be. She showed me island, coconut style. Show me banana, show me the way. Yeah. Adile andi, riddle up what's wonder how. Magdali da 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 sa lo mais, rana ki. Adile andi, riddle up what's wonder how.
I remember your phone actually had something, yeah?
Hū Ka Wai Māpuna, Māpuna kapukaha. Hainu hawala kapuha noa e nā kupu kupu o nā kupuna e malama ka māpuna, malama ka māpuna I ola loa I mauli ola.
Buenas, aloha, hafadeh, antiro, everybody. Thank you guys for joining us today. I think it's still morning. I'm in Saipan, so it's like 5 a.m., 6 a.m. for me, but I don't remember what time it is in Hawaii right now. But Guahusi Sami, Birmingham-Babauta. My home is in Saipan in the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, where I am right now. I got here yesterday. My backyard overlooks the waters of Laulau Bay, which is this picture here. And the cinema is located in the Micronesian region and the indigenous lands of the Chamorro and Rifalawash, or Carolann people.
Asilelia o aloha kako e chungalat ye Carolann Carl. I'm the other co-host for today alongside Sami. My name is Carolann, and home for me is the beautiful island of Pohnpei in the Federated States of Micronesia, where the waters of Tau Sokole in this water raised me, and the people of Letau and Aro raised me as well. I've lived back and forth between Hawaii and Pohnpei my entire life, and I've lived for the most part in the Mokukona for this year marks the 20th year here.
Oh.
Please. We are members of the Māpuna Lab, and in this lab, one of our goals as Indigenous people and as members of the communities that have experienced colonial trauma, we aim to be a place of respite for everybody else who's also experienced those colonial traumas, to help everybody relearn and reteach themselves about their cultural practices, but also with an emphasis on those of Hawaii being of this Aina and being visitors here. Also being of this land that feeds us and products of the oceans that brought us here. Next slide, please. Today, our learning objectives will be: 1, we together will understand the history and use of the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander acronym in data collection and the importance of data disaggregation for other Pacific Islanders in Hawaii. 2, we will identify strategies to avoid creating harm with data-informed decision-making and evaluation by understanding how data can provide context on historical and generational trauma of different population groups, which can be used as a CSAC screening tool. And 3rd, we will engage in an immersive learning experience with cultural knowledge to develop strategies for inclusion of programming that serves the other Pacific Island communities. Next slide, please. Here's our agenda today. As many of you who have been here before know, we always begin with the consent to deepen. Then we'll introduce the impacts of colonization on Ahupuaʻa Conceptualization version 3 by Papa Olalokahi, one of our partners for this webinar, alongside the AANHPI Ohana Center of Excellence. Then we're going to go over the SAMHSA recovery model and 12 core functions of a substance abuse counselor. We will then look at the acronym NHPI and think about Native Hawaiian and the other Pacific Islanders. We're going to hear community stories from 2 guest speakers today. Then we're going to look at data disaggregation strategies and why we should disaggregate. Next slide, please. So firstly, now we ask for your consent to deepen. A lot of times in this space, we ask that everybody be open to being vulnerable. One of the recovery models we're looking at today addresses trauma. And if you feel in your heart of hearts that you cannot deal with talking about trauma today and working through it with us, that is totally okay. This is your time to hop off. You will still get a copy of the recording for you to access at a later date when you do feel comfortable talking about trauma and the ways it's affected different communities, specifically the other Pacific Island communities here in Hawaii. So we're going to give you a few seconds to contemplate, and if you choose to stay on, that is your consent. And now I invite Lilinoe to share with us.
Ahahea keia nola ina ohana, ua mai ole o ka aina malie. Ahena ni vale no I ka makaloha, eia ka hile oe, e pane mai ho ila. Aloha e, aloha e, aloha e. Aloha. Mahalo nui for allowing me to be a part of today's session, and mahalo nui to both Sami and Carolann and the whole Māpuna Lab for putting on such an amazing series. And I'm very excited for the rest of today's content. I'm here today representing two of the partner organizations that are co-sponsor or co-putting on this series. And one is the AANHPI Ohana Center of Excellence. This is a new initiative that our organization, Papua Lalokahi, is helping to spearhead. We are taking lead on cultural needs for Native Hawaiians on a national level. And so if you go check out that website, we are an online source for empowerment, education, and supporting of individuals that are seeking behavioral health. And we provide mental health and substance use resources that are culturally tailored and culturally appropriate for each of the ethnicities and cultures that we serve under the Center of Excellence. We also provide technical assistance, webinars, workshops, and we're building an online repository of, again, culturally appropriate resources that will be searchable by culture, by language. We'll be providing in-language interpretation for all webinars by year 2. So a lot of really cool things are going to be happening. We'll be supporting Pacific Islander languages and translating all of their content, translating all of everything that we put out. And so everything will be in language, and we're really, really excited about that. So anyways, go check out our website if you want to learn more. The other, I'm the program manager for that, or the project manager. And then for Papua Lalokahi, I am a program coordinator for all of our substance use and mental health projects. And if you're not familiar with Papua Lalokahi, we are the Native Hawaiian Health Board, and we were born out of the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Improvement Act, which was originally passed by Congress back in the 80s. And our mission is to raise the health status of Native Hawaiians to the highest possible level. Next slide, please. We oversee the 5 Native Hawaiian healthcare systems, as well as house a Native Hawaiian healthcare scholarship program. And we house the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander 3R COVID response team. Next slide. So I wanted to share with you folks the Ahupuaʻa model that was mentioned earlier. And I think many of you have probably been on our other webinars and probably heard me share about this a bunch of times, but I'm going to share about it again, because we want to make sure that we're framing things through the use of this model, as it is intended to support our cultural life ways. So as we kind of start framing things for ourselves as we move in through this, I wanted to share the Hawaiian worldview. And so Hawaiian worldview is really based on the reciprocal nature of a person in relation to the land, in relation to their spirituality. Equal parts, all reciprocal in nature, which frames the way that we view the world and everything around us and our relation to everything around us. This is what we understood to provide that mauliola, or that optimal health. With Western influence and colonization, created this imbalance and shifted the paradigms of our people. Next slide. So the way this kind of manifests in the data, as we see higher representation of Native Hawaiians in treatment services and mental health services. And so I'm sharing about Native Hawaiians because that's my area of study, and that's all the work that Papua Lalokahi has done focuses on Native Hawaiians. And I want to share this because there are a lot of things that really that connect us more than we maybe even realize. So this is the way that we see manifestation. Next slide. And so, but the data only really tells us half of that story, right? It tells us what's wrong. It's not telling us what's right. And here's the things that connect us as one people of the Pacific is our connection to the land as a part of our family, and the ocean that doesn't separate us, but connects us all. And so I want to read some of the quotes from this report that we kind of use to frame, because it has ike kupuna, our ancestral knowledge, and words of our kupuna that have been passed down for generations about how to provide culturally appropriate services for our people. And so I'm going to read some of this. So this is actually Imi Kiolamal was a name that was given by Auntie Munil Craver. And this was some work that brought together a bunch of Native Hawaiian organizations at Kupuna who paved the way for this work in the decades prior. So in order for our people to heal and recover from substance use and mental health issues, we need a sense of place that provides anchors for our values and balance in life. We need immediate access to and availability of a safe, healthy environment, which includes all the natural elements such as kai, salt water, bai, fresh water, air, aina, land, and all of the animate and inanimate aspects of nature, which make up the physical environment. To heal, we need more than just Western practices. Those Western practices are not what's going to make our people well. The motivation comes from caring for our sources, the aina, and the reward is our wellness, which we perpetuate through all of our relationships through caring for our land. We need the resiliency and protection that our culture provides in order to prevent relapse and redefine ourselves away from pathological diagnosis. We need a sense of self retrieved from our past through our ancestors, present through purpose, and future through our descendants. We need our language, tradition, ceremonies, which provide ways to reconnect to our spirituality and to our concept of the source. We need our lands, our other natural resources, our language, our aumakua, our deified ancestors, our kupuna, our elders, our ohana, our families, and our roles as makua, parents, kamali'i, children, and kanaka. And we need not become Western to heal. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share that framing because it brings us to the Ahupuaʻa model that we've put forth in our work with ADAD as a way to reconceptualize a system of care for Native Hawaiians in Hawaii as it relates to substance use and mental health. But really it's applicable in a lot of different areas. And I think it's a model that really resonates across the Pacific because of the similarities of our cultures and connections to the land. So if you're not familiar with the Ahupuaʻa, it's a land division from the mountain to the sea, and it is there are interconnected systems within the Ahupuaʻa, and each is dependent on the health of the next. So this model provides a metaphorical and a living model to view the ongoing impacts of colonization, historical trauma, and other risk factors on Native peoples, and provides a resonant model of a Native system that's grounded in that reciprocal relationship of kanaka to aina, to spirituality, and to self in order to achieve that collective healing or mauliola. So the Ahupuaʻa being a living, breathing example of a thriving, healthy Native system, which is all connected through vai and flows through each interconnected system. And so if the water is not healthy, like maybe it's contaminated with pollutants or something, then we are not healthy because that water is flowing through all of the interconnected systems of the Ahupuaʻa, and everything then becomes unbalanced and unhealthy. And so this model was influenced by White Bison and their Healing Forest model, as well as Dr. Keali Kaholokula's Social and Cultural Determinants of Health, which you can see down on the bottom right. And the artist that drew this depiction, his name is Kimoa Paka. He's from Hawaii Island. So I'll just briefly share a little bit, since I know many of you probably heard me talk about it before, but within this model, you see the risk factors on the left side. And so the social and cultural determinants of health are actually envisioned within the rain to show that cyclical transmission as they go down into the soil. They run through all the water systems out into the ocean, gets evaporated up and back into the sky. And that's the cyclical transmission of both risk factors there on the left and protective factors there on the right that you'll see. On the risk factor side, you see as it starts to infiltrate the soil, it creates these layers of eha, this pain, right? This anger, this guilt, the fear, the shame. These are the layers of eha that impact the soil. That then that feeds the next generations of our people. Our people then puka out of that. They emerge from that unhealthy soil and they carry that eha with them. And they may not really even know that it's there. There's the intergenerational trauma part, or there's also our lifetime trauma that can impact that soil. So as we puka up, it starts to manifest on the surface level symptoms that we see as substance use and suicide and things like that. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to clean our spaces of those risk factors in order to create more space for our protective factors. Our protective factors are transmitted in a similar way intergenerationally, right? Our protective factors, our culture, our mo'opu'auhau, our ike kupuna, all of our things that are parts of our culture that keep us grounded and keep us healthy, keep us safe, those are also transmitted intergenerationally and can impact our soil and impact the next generation of our people that then puka out of that healthy soil. But so many times the risk factors, right, are just they're loud, they're in your face, they're taking over, it's pain, right? And so we really have to, within this system, we hope that it is a space that creates even more space for our cultural life ways to be supportive, so that we're not trying to fit a cultural intervention into a Western box, but our cultural life way can exist in the way that it has kept our people grounded and healthy for centuries, can exist within the system and be supported by this system. And so I won't go into the detail of the micro level with the kalo and the lo'i specifically and how we can kind of get into that, but I will drop some links in the chat so you folks can check it out and do some more reading on your own if you're interested in this. But I want to pass it back to Sami and Carolann. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Lilinoe. All right, so thank you so much. Now we're gonna go into, we have two other frameworks. So next slide, please. And so as we reflect on what Lilinoe shared with us today about the Ahupuaʻa, back one slide. We want to ask these questions for our audience to consider. What is your Ahu? What is your Pua'a? And so with those, you can reflect, write them down, journal, or add them to the chat so that we can see that. And now, next slide, please. And there's two other frameworks that if you've been attending our webinar series for this summer, you'll see that we're trying to have this be our common ground. And so the second one is the SAMHSA's working definition of recovery, which it has all of these components here that work towards achieving recovery with substance use. And then the second is the 12 core functions of a substance abuse counselor, where we look at the global considerations for these 12 core functions, along with the cultural considerations that we've made from a Hawaii-based narrative. Next slide, please. And so, as we know, all of these components for the SAMHSA's working definition of recovery need to work together in order to achieve recovery. But for today's conversation, we're looking especially at addressing trauma. And so as we speak about the other Pacific Islanders in the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander acronym, and then I'm emphasizing the Micronesian experience in Hawaii, this is one of the big things for us, at least, is addressing the trauma of losing our island homes and these US negotiations and relationships that have caused us harm and have caused us to move to the US to live and get healthcare and all of these things. And then and the stigma and the prejudice and the racism that's come from that, and the trauma that has been as a result, and where we're now and what we're trying to move into. And so that's kind of the idea of this framework and kind of emphasizing this part of it. Next slide. All right, and so now we'll get into the meat of our presentation. And so Native Hawaiians and the other Pacific Islanders. So if you're like me, where we hear there's so many variations of, there was AAPI, NHPI, NHOPI, AANHPI, all of these different things. But in 1977 is when the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, included Pacific Islanders into their Asian racial and ethnic grouping, which created the AAPI acronym. So 1977. And so this was defined as a person having origins in any of the original peoples of the Far East, Southeast Asia, the Indian subcontinent, or the Pacific Islands. Example areas are China, India, Japan, Korea, the Philippine Islands, and Samoa. And then in 1997, OMB split the AAPI acronym to become just Asian American or Asian racial grouping, and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, which is what we commonly use now as NHPI. And so, and even in this definition, we kind of looked so much like, we did a lot of research to try to find where this definition was, because even if you read this, you'll be like, a lot of these racial groups for Pacific Islanders are misrepresented. Like they have Northern Mariana Islander, which is not a thing. And so anyway, we were kind of like laughing at this, like, oh, we really need people at the table to help develop these definitions. But NHPI was defined as a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Hawaii, Guam, Samoa, or other Pacific Islands. The term Native Hawaiian does not include individuals who are native to the state of Hawaii by virtue of being born there. In addition to Native Hawaiians and Guamanians, which is not an ethnic group, and Samoans, this category would include the following Pacific Islander groups reported in the 1990 census: Carolinian, Fijian, Costa Rican, Melanesian, Micronesian, Northern Mariana Islander, Palauan, Papua New Guinean, Pohnpeian, Polynesian, Solomon Islander, Tahitian, Tarawa Islander, Tokolauan, Tongan, and Chukis and Yapis. Okay, next slide. And so we really wanted to talk about who are the other Pacific Islanders. And for our conversation today, we wanted to look at the USAPIs. And so the USAPI stands for the US Affiliated Pacific Islands, which is a federally used phrase that describes the islands in the Pacific with relationships to the US. And so of the 6 USAPIs, there are 2 that are US territories, which is American Samoa and Guam, or Guahan. One that's a Commonwealth, which is the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, where I'm from. And then 3 independent countries or sovereign states, which include the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of Marshall Islands, and the Republic of Palau. And so we also kind of did some like defining what the difference, like the different political relationships are. And so like American Samoa is an unincorporated territory, which means only parts of the US Constitution apply to American Samoa. And they're also an unorganized territory, which means they have no organic act. And so, and I'm not a pro at this, so if anybody can explain this better, go ahead and put that in the chat. But my understanding of having no organic act is meaning that they don't have a in writing with the US that when you're born in American Samoa, you're a US citizen. To some, like that's a part of what that organic act is. And then the Sinamai, which includes Saipan, Tinian, Rota. We are also an unincorporated territory where we do not have, only parts of the US Constitution apply to us. And then we're a Commonwealth because we have our own constitution. And that's how we differ from Guam, where they don't have their own constitution, but they are still an unincorporated territory where, like American Samoa and us, where only parts of the US Constitution apply. And then for the Federated States of Micronesia, which is a grouping, I guess just a naming for 4 major island groups, but many islands, Pohnpei, Chuk, Yap, and Kosrae. They're a sovereign state, and so their relationship with the US is through the Compact of Free Association, or COFA. And that's the same relationship, or same structure with the Republic of Marshall Islands and the Republic of Palau. Next slide. And so going into Micronesia, because that's our focus today, that's the a big makeup of the USPIs and what we see, some of the trauma and what we're trying to address in the healthcare system in Hawaii. And so the Micronesian region includes the Sinamai, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, which is Saipan, Tinian, Rota, and 11 other islands. The Federated States of Micronesia, which is Chuk, Kosrae, Pohnpei, Yap, Guam, Kiribati, and Nauru, which we have highlighted here because they are not USAPIs, but they are part of Micronesia, and then Marshall Islands and Palau.
So how did we become USAPIs as part of the Micronesian region? Those of you who joined us earlier this week have heard these key bits of history, and we're going to reiterate them here. The United States ended up in Micronesia as a result of the World Wars. First, after World War I, Japan annexed Micronesia as ordered by the League of Nations. And in Micronesia, while they were also trying to increase their economics, they also built military installations across the region. That type of military strategic advantage is what allowed Japan to attack Pearl Harbor here in Hawaii on December 7th of 1941. In retaliation to that attack, the US then joined World War II, and they would perform aerial attacks across the Micronesian region to hit all of the Japanese fleet's airports and main installations. One of the biggest aerial attacks performed was Operation Hailstone on February 17th of 1944, when they attacked one of the biggest Japanese ghost fleets, which was stationed in Chuuk Lagoon. Now, Chuuk is one of the top 10 dive sites in the world, not for its pristine coral reefs, but for the World War II ruins that lie at the bottom of their lagoon. After this, the US established a lot of its military installations in the Micronesian region. And the atomic bombings on Nagasaki and Hiroshima were launched from an airfield in Tinian in the Northern Marianas on August of 1945. As a result of this history, the US would acquire our land, air, and sea for military strategic purposes to protect itself in the Pacific. In negotiations with the United Nations, they created what is known as the US Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands. Its districts make up the different districts of Micronesia that had not become a territory yet and that were not affiliated with the British. Those districts were the Northern Marianas, the Marshall Islands, Palau, Pohnpei, Yap, Chuuk, and Koshai. To note, Guam was acquired as a US territory in 1898, the same year that Hawaii was annexed. So a lot more connections than differences. Next slide, please. So how has that affected us as migrants in that relationship? For Micronesians that come to the US from the places that I have just described, we come here as non-immigrants. Under the Compact of Free Association for the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Republic of Palau, and the Federated States of Micronesia, there are three main reasons why we are allowed to travel here visa-free: for education, labor, and healthcare. When the compacts were first signed in 1986 and then 89 and 94, because again, three different compacts exist because there are three different sovereign states. The immigration status we held under US federal law was that of qualified aliens who have permanent residence under color of law. Then in 1996, the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, passed by the US federal government, rendered all COFA ineligible for federal public assistance. Separately, CNMI and Guam, as organized territories and therefore US citizens, remain eligible for federal aid. A great example of this differentiation is when Typhoon Mawar came through Guam. Any COFA migrants who live on Guam were not eligible to receive FEMA aid, but if they had children who were US citizens and born on those islands, then they could apply through their children. Thank you. Next slide. And so it caused, oh, sorry, go ahead, Sami.
You want to take it?
No, that's all you.
Okay. And so this brings us to looking at Micronesian and Hawaii. And so Micronesian is often a term that is misunderstood and misused in Hawaii and creates a limited view of the people, cultures, and islands in Micronesia. And common misuses of Micronesian is to describe just the indigenous people of the 4 states in FSM, Chukis, Koshrayan, Pohnpei, and Yapis, or to describe the indigenous people from the islands under the Compact of Free Association, which includes the FSM, Palau, and Marshall Islands. I'm from Saipan, born and raised, and so when I first left to go to college in California, I never grew up using the word Micronesian. My only association to Micronesian was the Micronesian Mall in Guam. That's the only thing that I really knew when I heard that word. And so, and then when I moved to California to go to school, and people were trying to understand, what's Chamorro, what's Saipan? Are you sure you're not trying to say Spain? Like, I ended up just defaulting to Pacific Islander. I was like, oh, everybody knows Pacific Islander, I'm just gonna say that. And then when I moved back home, worked in public health system, in Saipan for like 5 years, or in the CNMI for 5 years. And then I moved to Seattle, where in Washington, there's a strong Micronesian presence. And that's where I really developed like a connection to this word, because I never grew up using it. We grew up saying who we are. We say our own cultures. And when I was in Seattle and in Washington, there was a unity of that word, of all of us that were living there, that were from all these different islands in Micronesia. And then when I came to Hawaii last year, August, and connected to Carolann, which, if you know her, she is a boss in the Micronesian community in Hawaii. And so really brought me into this world of like Micronesian excellence, and looking at it and using this word in a way that I never used before. And which kind of really inspired this webinar series to teach how to use the word Micronesian correctly, and to name the communities that you, especially as different behavioral health program providers or healthcare providers, knowing who we're working with and who we're serving, and recognizing that Micronesian is not one language, it's just a region. And so next slide, please.
Thank you, Sami. I echo everything you said. Just to I really want to emphasize that the term FSM, Federated States of Micronesia, is akin to the term United States of America, wherein we are just the parts of Micronesia that decided to become a federation, right? There's a whole other ocean of Micronesias. Just like the United States are the only parts of the Americas that decided to become united, because there are several American continents and therefore several types of American people. Growing up mostly in Hawaii, I grew up as one of those Micronesian kids called a cockroach, which was interesting enough to grow up in growing up here. I don't usually call myself local because I didn't go to high school here. So when people ask me, oh, where you in grad? And I'm like, back home. But I went to elementary and middle school here, and then graduated UH Manoa because I came back after going to community college back home. I've been one of the Micronesians in school where if my excellence does show, my teachers will ask like, oh, so where's your dad from? Because you cannot be full Micronesian, you know, like you're too smart. Or even going to the DMV and trying to get like a state ID and being told like, oh, because of federal law, they always cite the wrong laws. You cannot actually get your state ID here. And so even though I've lived here for 20 years, I only just got my Hawaii state ID literally 2 months ago. And so along those lines, we're going to go into our community stories portion, where we've asked our guest speakers to talk about their experiences with using the terms Pacific Islander and also the terms Micronesian in their work, all of the different types of trauma they come across, whether that's working with people in lines of healthcare, labor, or education. And next slide, please. Our first speaker, because we're in Hawaii, we're going to start in Hawaii, is another boss of Micronesian excellence here in Hawaii and back home, Shanty Segra Asher, who is currently the Pacific Islander liaison at the Sinian County of Honolulu Office of Economic Revitalization. Shanty went to elementary school and high school in Koshai and earned both her Bachelor of Science in Pre-Law and a Master of Science in Criminal Justice Administration at Chaminade University here in Honolulu. After earning her JD Law degree from the Thomas Jefferson School of Law in San Diego in 2018, Shanty returned to Hawaii, where she became fully engaged in supporting the Micronesian community. She wears so many hats, and I really hope that she has the time, that we've given her enough time to touch on all of the richness that she brings and the help and support she brings to the community. One more fun fact about Shanty. Former Governor Ige nominated her, and she was subsequently confirmed by the Hawaii State Legislature to serve on the 12-member Hawaii State Board of Education. Shanty, if you could please, the stage is yours.
Hello, Malalab, Carol, and Galangan. Mahalo, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today to share this space and to also highlight some of the You know, I always want to say strengths, but before we get into strengths, we have to break down the barriers that our community has been experiencing for decades. As Carol said, thank you so much for the introduction. I really call myself a Pacific Islander and just a community advocate, simply put. My position at the city and county was created during COVID. You know, sometimes we have lost so many of our loved ones from the pandemic. But the silver lining was that it was the one thing that forced people to step out and see what's going on with the system. That's when we were seen. And my position was created because we spiked in our numbers and there was nothing that was working. So the next question is, can they come in and tell us what we can do? I was very honored. This was the first Pacific Islander liaison created within the city and county of Honolulu. And I have seen that the pandemic, when they saw best practices, it also opened up opportunities at the state and also in many other levels to just invite us to be a part of the solution. And, you know, we talk trauma. I will share 3 stories or 4. And they really will give you kind of put you in the shoes of those people. And, you know, many times I try not to cry, but many times I kept asking, how did they make it? How did our aunties, our uncles, our sons and daughters, how did they make it? After all of this treatment, how are they still able to smile and walk into a classroom to do better? Education. Before I started on the board, I shared this story because I was invited to help shape policy. And this was before coming on the board. We were so caught up in finding the right words to use in our policy. And I had to step in because the day before, Chuki's mom had to post on her Facebook page, how is it that I sent my 8-year-old son to go and get educated so he can do better by us and his community, just to be told that he should keep his head down because there's nothing to look up to. That's one. Employment. What do you mean you do not have a visa? You are not a national, you are not a legal resident, you are not an immigrant, you are not a citizen. So you need to have a visa. If you do not have a visa number, you cannot be legally working here. Healthcare. Go ahead and schedule him at 8 a.m. They will not show up. And they're not even going to ask if you can schedule for another time that works because they don't speak English. Public safety. You need to send police. There are Micronesians sitting in a nearby park, and they are only up to no good. Emergency service. While in an ambulance, a first responder told a daughter of Chuk, "Do you have an insurance?" She said, "No." "Then it is up to you. You can come with us to the emergency room, but they will not take you. So you either can come with us or go there just to not get into treatment." 2 weeks, she got out, struggled to go back upstairs. 2 weeks later, she died from COVID. Trauma. These are the many stories that I have to deal with on a regular basis. It is already hard that we were promised mutual respect and benefit. To come here and be treated like we are nothing. When the US created this bilateral relationship, the words were mutual respect and mutual benefit among so many provisions promised. And when they come to the FSM, we roll out the red carpet for them. All they need to show is a passport. But when we come through Guam, even when we get there, from United Service to getting off in Guam and Hawaii, we start to be traumatized. But yet we still come because for many, we do not have any more hope because what was promised to us was never given. You think we want to leave our homes to go live somewhere else that treat us like we do not belong or value? No, but we have to provide for our families, so we come. These are some of the stories that I listen to on a daily basis. And it breaks my heart that sometimes we even feel it from fellow Pacific Islanders. We have to stand united because colonization has really, really brainwashed us. We forget that we are family and we look out for each other. So in my line of work, I could not have done it without partners in our community, our Pacific Islanders. Even the biggest supporters are non-Micronesians. I am very privileged to be doing what I'm doing, but it takes more than me, Carol, and Sami, and every one of us here to change it. In my capacity as a board member, at the policy level, I focus on not academic is important, but what I wanted to make sure everyone understands is we have to start with sense of belonging. If my kid walks into a school and feel that she is there and will be served, not because served differently because of who she looks or what she looks like, that is not sense of belonging. We must first create an environment that provides aloha to all kids. That is when they will want to come. That is when everything else falls into place. So when we speak trauma, it is across the board for many COFA citizens. From my daughter, who's trying to do more work to serve because she is not assumed to be Micronesian because she is doing well in school. And for the kid that is told to keep his head down because our culture does not allow you to look straight in people's eyes. You can't do that culturally. So we have to learn so that we can support each other and eliminate many of the misunderstandings that are out there. There are so many challenges, but our immigration status is the first because it is the gateway for us to integrate smoothly into the system. But if states do not understand what we have given up to be here, then it's going to continue to be a very slow process. So I do want to thank all of you guys for inviting me and for listening. I think that's what I wanted to say in my 10 or 15 minutes. I hope I didn't overstay my invitation. Thank you so much.
That was amazing. Kalangan Lap Shanty for your wisdom, for your leadership, for your vulnerability to share all of the different stories that you face. We give a lot of credit to you. Your position cannot.
Join the meeting.
Thank you so much for your resilience. If you have any questions for Shanty, please feel free to send them in the chat. With her permission, we will also share her contact info with you if you would like to stay connected. Next slide, please. Now that we've talked a little bit about Hawaii, let's move into other places where Micronesians, and in this case, COFA, exist in the US. Our next guest speaker is Dichela Uweki, born and raised in the Republic of Palau. She recently graduated from Western Washington University in August of last year. And through the university's Fairhaven program, she had the opportunity to design her own major titled Re-Theorizing Education and Centering Community. allowing her to delve into her passions and combine various fields of study to create a unique academic pathway. She concentrated on 3 key areas: law, diversity and justice, Indigenous history, and public health. Her studies in LDJ, law, diversity and justice, provided her with a deep understanding of the complexities of the legal system and its impact on marginalized communities. Her exploration of Indigenous history and public health helped her to see the added effects of health disparities that Indigenous communities face and how access to resources can be affected by law. She also pursued a minor in education and social justice, which enhanced her understanding of the critical role education plays in promoting equity within academia through creating inclusive and equitable learning environments. Currently, she works with a small nonprofit, the Pacific Islander Health Board of Washington, where she plays 2 roles as the Palauan Kofa Healthcare Navigator and also the Assistant Program Manager for the Health Navigation Team. If everyone would please join me in welcoming Dichela.
Thank you, Carolann. I'm sorry, that was a lot longer than I expected. I apologize for making you read all that. So hello everyone. As Carolann mentioned, my name is Dichela Uegi. My pronouns are they, them, and she, her, hers. And as mentioned, I was born and raised in the island of Palau and came out when I was around 14, right before high school. And I'm here representing the Pacific Islander Health Board of Washington. I am the current Assistant Program Manager for our Health Navigation Team, and I also serve as the Palauan Kofa Navigator. And we also have 4 other health navigators from the islands of Pohnpei, Yap, the Marshall Islands, and Chuuk. And so our team, we travel all over Washington State, and we provide support in state insurance enrollment, childhood immunizations, COVID-19, and flu vaccines. And we also offer free PPE to our communities out here. And through our time, we hear of the ongoing lack of accessibility that our Kofa communities have in regards to state insurance and just state services in general. And being within community, it allows us to hear firsthand what their needs are. And we find ways that we can offer support, whether that be through our translation service offered through our different navigators, the insurance enrollment. We're about to start up our perinatal support group for our community. And we also offer connections to rental assistance and youth mental health, as well as political training. And recently, there's actually been a rise in cases of measles and TB here in Washington State, more King County area, where our Marshallese community has been heavily impacted. However, none of the information that come out from the state are often not translated, which leaves our entire community in the shadows as their numbers rise. But however, community leaders and community partners came together and we get the materials translated and push the local public health department to get those out more into the community. And as local nonprofits such as ourselves and other PI-centered nonprofits, we try to raise awareness around those translated materials. But on the state and governmental level, we've noticed how the aggregation of data on the other Pacific Islanders clumps up all of our experiences of how many of our diverse bodies, and which inaccurately depicts the needs of each of our communities. And this has led to the lack of visibility and the limited understanding of specific economic, health, immigration, and educational needs. One of the biggest barriers that we see in our work is the lack of understanding as to what Kofa is, and at the broader spectrum, what Micronesia is, where Micronesia is, and how that plays a role within the United States. And as a result of that lack of understanding, we see the unequal distribution of resources and services that we're trying to bridge gaps in between. And here at the PI Health Board, the way that we create our data or record our data is we categorize them by each of our island nations. That way we can see which islands need to be prioritized in terms of when we go out into community and offer our events and our services. And I just wanted to go off of what Shanty mentioned. As much as we do this work, as much as we think that we're making a right push, it cannot just be only one of us. It cannot just be one organization that creates that change and creates that understanding of our needs and our necessities. It needs to be everyone, partners, community members that need to work towards uplifting communities, especially those that are in privileged areas or privileged communities. Yes, that's all from me.
Thank you so much, Dichela, for all of the wisdom you shared with us.
Yeah.
Just like Shanty, if you have any questions you would like to ask Dichela, you're welcome to message her directly in the chat, or with her permission, we will also be sharing her contact information at her, so you folks can also explore all of the wonderful work that the Pacific Islander Health Board of Washington does in serving our communities. Next, we're going to move on to data disaggregation strategies. Next slide, please. And I'm going to invite Sami back.
Thank you, Carolann and Suleng, Dichela and Shanty for the stories that you shared with us, and I think are really important. And I connected to the Pacific Island Health Board after living in Seattle, and really I just appreciated the unity in the work that they do. When you go to the Pacific Island Health Board and when you see their material, we're all together, Micronesians, Polynesians, Melanesians, that they serve all of us as one. And one of the more culturally shocking things for me when I moved to Hawaii in August to start my PhD was, I remember I went to a Pacific Islander student meeting, which when I lived in California or when I lived in Washington, that's all of us. And when I got to the Pacific Islander student meeting, everyone did their introductions and I was like, oh, there's no Hawaiians here. That's crazy because we're in Hawaii. And they're like, oh no, they have their own meeting. And I was like, oh. And then I realized that now I'm under this Pacific Islander umbrella, and it's completely different from the Pacific Islander umbrella in Washington and in California and all these other places, and even more across the Pacific, where our other island groups that are not a part of the US, and we say these terms, it was just different. And so reflecting on all of these things, we wanted to pose the question, should we stay Micronesian? And we do get this asked a lot just from our personal experiences and whatnot. But for us, we think the answer is yes. We are, yes, but correctly, right? And so that's what we've been talking about today. And Carolann and I just met with this researcher who, she's in her preliminary stages, but she is looking at the discourse in the media on Micronesians over time. And what she's seeing currently is that there is this generation of reclamation of the word Micronesian and taking back this narrative and being loud and proud. And we want to say these words, we want to be Micronesian. We're owning this space and we're trying to change the narrative. And this is from a narrative that's been causing harm and trauma and pain and sadness to now where we have images like this, where we say the future is Micronesian, that we're paving our own way, and that we, especially as when we're not back home in Micronesia, when we're in other places, come together and connect, and we connect over that. And we want to connect for the Pacific as a whole and Pacific Islanders and all the different cultures, because as we keep moving farther out, we find that connection and find those bubbles, and we want that to be the same in Hawaii and be connected in this way. And even though the phrase Micronesian was made by this French dude, right, where we're like, oh, we don't want to take out these colonizers or these whatever, people's phrases. But I think that for us, at least, we love this word right now, and we're in it and we want to represent it. And so for us, it's okay. Like, yes, please say Micronesian, but please understand what it means when you're saying Micronesian, that you're referring to a region that has many islands and cultures, and it's not just one person. It's not, when I moved here, they're like, oh, do you speak Micronesian? And I was like, do I speak 100 languages? No. Do you? Like, that's the, and so making sure that we use these words correctly. Next slide, please. And this is especially important in in data collection. And so I've seen many forms, and this is, I'm coming from a Saipan Chamorro view, where especially, and even as close as Guam does this to us, where they put things on their data collection where they say Saipanese, Tinianese, Rotanese, Chamorro, like, and, I'm just looking at these forms, like, what are these categories? Like, these are so incorrect. And then as you go out, and so wanting to make sure that we capture, it's really important to capture accurate data, as we've heard from both Shanty and Dichela, that to know what groups, what languages things need to be translated in, what services, what kind of, like, who we need to get from the community to serve as health navigators. And Carolann will show a little bit of an example of the importance of data disaggregation later, but know who you are trying to identify, right? Micronesian describes the indigenous people of the USIPIs in the Micronesian region, because from what I know, it's not commonly, or from what we know, it's not commonly used in the US to describe people from Kiribati or Nauru, whose ties are historically to Britain. And so it's really kind of been used for the indigenous people of the USIPIs in Micronesia. And then more specifically, as we talked about earlier, people use it just to talk about people from the Federated States of Micronesia, which is also not a culture. It's still a grouping and a region, or people under COFA, when the Micronesians, which is also something that I had to talk a lot about with people, is that recognizing that Guam and Sinai, we weren't being included in this Micronesian, when people speak about Micronesians. And a lot of that has to do with our political status, that we are US citizens, that are group. And so I would talk a lot with Carolann and my other friends, like, can I say that I'm Micronesian? Because I don't want to say that and erase the trauma that is being felt by other Micronesians, because that's where that's coming from. And so I don't want to come in and say this word and erase all the barriers and things. But I'm from the region, and I want us to be united and all of that. And so it was such a conversation that we continue to have and reflect on and develop, as especially this generation of Micronesians. Next slide, please. And so this is the best practice. We pulled this, and so some concepts for best practice of racial and ethnic data collection. This is a question that comes up a lot, but really there's a lot of freedom in how you categorize or how you offer a registration form, how you collect data. And so agencies can use more disaggregated racial and ethnic categories, and the answer is like yes. They can use more detailed racial and ethnic categories if they can be aggregated or rolled up into the minimum categories. So that means that you can list out the different island nations in Micronesia, because that can be rolled up into the NHPI acronym or category. And then, is there a required order for the racial categories to be displayed? And the answer is no. It's left up to agencies to decide. And so we can go next slide, please. And so this is an example of a very old school registration form that I pulled from here. And so we oftentimes, like I said, I never heard the word really used, Micronesian. And so the way that in Saipan and the CNMI, we offer our racial categories is we have our indigenous groups first, Chamorro and Carolann, and then we have all of the other Micronesians listed out. We have Pohnpeian, Chukis, Yapis, Marshalls, Kosrayan, Palauan. We have a big Filipino population here as well. And so most of this is a little bit old school. Because I could not find anything available on Google, but yeah, in a lot of our registration forms, it's who we have here as a community. And so even in our Asian population here, we have, like I said, a big Filipino population, Korean, Japanese, Chinese. So those are all listed out. And then the other box to allow people to self-identify, and for us to know, like, oh, we're seeing a big increase of this group. We need to now add that as a category because they've come over here or they've established a home here. And so that's what we hope to encourage for different organizations, whatever city you're in or whatever group that your organization serves. naming all of these, naming those people, even if, and it may not be Micronesians, it may be a whole different group, but pulling apart those pieces and thinking about the Ahupuaʻa model of we're looking at the different parts that make it a whole. And that's what we're asking for as part of the Micronesian community, is to name us and show what makes us a whole Micronesian region, but that we're also so different, that we don't speak the same language. I don't speak the same language as Carolann. I don't have the same experience as her. She doesn't have the same experience as me. Our connections to the US are different, but we're from the same region and we're connected in that way. And she doesn't have the same as people from Marshall Islands, and I don't have the same as Dichela from Palau. And we're so spread out, right? And so just emphasizing knowing who you're serving, naming us correctly, and yes, using the word Micronesian, but using the word Micronesian to explain all of us, FSM, Kofa, Sinamai, Guam, the whole region, Kiribati, Nauru, like making sure that that's when you're using that word, you're understanding what it means. Next slide, please. And now I will pass back to Carolann.
Thank you, Sami. And so why disaggregate? Next slide, please. The importance of data disaggregation really showed itself through the pandemic. And I want to share as context, I had graduated from UH Manoa the summer of 2020 when the pandemic hit. It was so bad. My degree was in biochemistry, and the chemistry department didn't even have a graduation for us at all. They were just like, you graduated, goodbye. Went off into the world. I was supposed to go home immediately, but then became stranded here because our borders were closed. And so then I started working at Kukua-Kalihi Valley, where we worked with a lot of the communities to provide resources that they needed. And the reason why data disaggregation became so important, especially during the pandemic, is because we saw that the cases, a lot of 30% of Hawaii's confirmed cases were traced to Pacific Islander communities. But it was hard to understand who in those communities specifically were being impacted, how they were impacted, and specifically what they needed. Data disaggregation becomes so important when we want to establish true baselines for our communities so that we can meet them where they're at in terms of advocacy, decision-making, policy-making, funding distribution, and even frontline aid. It was so hard to get aid to come to the Micronesian community because we didn't have the data to prove that the need was that high. Next slide, please. And factors of COVID spread were very specific to race and ethnicity. Households that were impacted were ones that were multi-generational and crowded. For COFA migrants specifically, and also folks from different regions, different nations in Micronesia suffer from higher rates of chronic illness. 3 of the different Micronesian countries that exist in the region are a part of the top 10 in the world for rates of diabetes. There are some of us who are here uninsured or underinsured. In terms of labor, Micronesians make up a good portion of Hawaii's service industry. And as a result of that, many of them were essential workers and they were already low income. They couldn't apply for unemployment because on the paper to apply, it had no place for COFA to put down our immigration status. And so folks like Shanty and Filios Uruman and the folks at the Medical Legal Partnership for Children had to really advocate for changing legal documents to include our immigration status so that we could get these resources that we needed, right? And so the differences became truly prominent in the health disparities experienced by subcategories of races, which is why it's so important that now that we've had the NH disaggregated from the PI, we work on truly disaggregating the PI. Next slide, please. The efforts in Hawaii were so great at disaggregating the subcategories and getting that data that the CDC recognized those efforts as one of the best practices to do so, especially during COVID-19. I was hoping to see Telly in here, but I don't see her. But they are going to do a webinar in this later on. And we will, not in this series, but as a part of their work, and we'll definitely be sharing that with other folks so that you can listen to them too directly. Next slide, please. They had done so good. They started to do weekly data disaggregation. Next slide, please. That was being pushed through their newsletter. And they also created disaggregated data-informed resources, because we're not just Pacific Islander does not have one language. It has so many. So they were able to begin pushing out all of these needed resources in language. I remember my interpreter friends, when they first started trying to translate all of this information, they had called me and they're like, Carol, how do I explain vaccines in my language? Like, how do I? And I was like, you mean like the chemistry of it? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, well, I wouldn't. Just connected to some type of traditional medicine you use, like in Pohnpeian, we traditionally have the concept of vaccines. So being able to take that type of cultural knowledge and make it and transform it into COVID relevant information was also one of the tasks that became really important, especially after the data was disaggregated. Next slide, please. All in all, the reason why we talk about data disaggregation, we connect it to one of the projects that we do in this lab is the Oceans of Reflection Community Mural Project. It was inspired by another mural that was created by Native Hawaiian artists, including Kumu Meliana Meyer, who helped us then create Oceans of Reflection. And the idea behind this mural is that we are able to take different bits and pieces of the Micronesian identity and put it into this big picture, so that when people see parts of us, they see all of us. Or when the other idea was that when other Pacific Islanders see the mural, they could also see parts of themselves in us. The same ways that Micronesians who live in Hawaii, we see ourselves in Native Hawaiian practices all the time. And that's what we try to connect to, whether it's even like by food, like you see the ulu in the drawing, you see the manuoku, you see all of these different components that resonate both within Hawaii and the larger Pacific. And when we talk about disaggregating data, what we're talking about is being able to see the small parts of the picture and the big parts of the picture at the same time, so that we can provide the resources, the advocacy, and the funding to the pieces that need it the most. Next slide, please.
Before we move into closing protocol, if I can add to the mural a little bit. And so if we can go back one slide. And connecting to the framework that we talked about with addressing trauma. And if you had joined me for our kickoff webinar on culturally safe space, on creating culturally safe spaces of being in a room or being in a space where you feel connected, where you feel seen and you feel important. Like these are key protective factors that when we look at the Ahupuaʻa model of a healthy community. And with the stories that Shanty shared, you hear that that hasn't been something that the Micronesian community has felt in Hawaii. And our migration to Hawaii hasn't been the American dream. It was because we had a relationship, there was a negotiation, and the result was that we're going to come to the US to get healthcare, to have jobs, because you did atomic bomb testing on our islands, because our islands are full of radiation that we cannot fish or pick the fruit off the tree. We can't even live there anymore. And now even climate change with all the superpowers in the globe, just polluting the air. And for us, we're going to be, Micronesia sadly probably going to be one of the first places to go and the first examples of climate migration. But aside from that, we talk about all of this today because when we're working towards addressing trauma and creating culturally safe spaces and providing for the community, we ask for help in making that happen, in naming us, knowing who we are, using those terms correctly. And in that, we can do in some of this work. And so this mural was an effort to show the youth, to show Micronesian youth, especially in Kalihi, that we're rich in our cultures, to come from a strength-based place instead of a deficit place. And so with that, it's a hope that this is a prevention tool for substance use, that kids can see themselves and know that they have value and know that they have culture and they have connection to each other, to other Pacific Islanders, to Hawaiians, and not go down and look to fill voids that might occur from not having these connections. And so that was kind of the tool, or the connection to this and the frameworks that we talked about and the overall webinar. But yes, so thank you, Carolann, for letting me share a little bit. And yeah, we will move into our closing protocol. Again, so I put in the chat, thank you guys so much we are kind of over in time, but we extended the webinar to 11:30. Is that Hawaii time? It's 7:30 for me. But we forgot to communicate that. And so if you're still here with us, thank you for being here. We put the evaluation links in the chat if you do have to hop off. If not, please stay with us to do our closing protocol. And so we are going to, in the chat, we have dropped our Whole Everywhere link for you to share with us. After every webinar, we do a one-word reflection. And so you can either use the link that is in the chat, or you could text the number 37607. And in that text, you put Mapuna Lab 361. And once it'll give you an okay. And so let's, Viana, if you haven't already, can you just activate the poll? And then we're going to switch screens. And yes, so if you could please send us your one word. It can be multiple one words. It can also be, if you use a phrase, then instead of spaces, put dashes so that it can come up as one. And we'll give it a second for the words to pop up. And as this is popping up, and just reading Davis's comment in the chat, one thing that we did talk a lot about when developing this content that we didn't talk so much about today is that understanding and using naming the different island nations in Micronesia in capturing data on Hawaii is also important, because Hawaii is kind of the hub for getting federal grants for the NHPIs, which includes, so even for us that don't live in Hawaii, we're still impacted by them receiving the federal money, that Hawaii receiving the federal money, and then coming over and doing research for us. I've worked when living here in the CNMI, worked a lot with UH, the school system, to do research in the different islands out here. And so it extends past just living in Hawaii. There is this responsibility to where Hawaii is kind of looked at as the Pacific Islander hub in the US connection, and serve and get the money and serve us too in our own homes. And so that's why it's important in that aspect, that for even if we don't come over and we never step foot in Hawaii, we're still impacted by the lack of data disaggregation and the misuse of words and terms and whatnot. And so that's another reason why we wanted to have this conversation and make these points. Anyway, this is such a beautiful word cloud I'm seeing, and strength-based again. I'm seeing reclamation, aloha, unity, belonging, togetherness, community, restoration, reflections, Oceania, decolonize, respectu, which is respect in Chamorro. Yeah, thank you guys so much. We're going to move into the next slide, going back to our presentation. And so here we have our I don't know if it's my island data that I'm in Saipan that's the screen hasn't loaded yet, or if it hasn't loaded for everybody. Okay, there I see it. And so we wanted to uplift our 2 other series that we have done in the past. So this is like our summer series that we're doing right now. And before this, we had the Native Hawaiian Cultural Intervention series, where we talked about the Kanelehua framework. And before that, we had the Ulu State Disaster Response Series. And so both of these, if you'd like them for CEUs, you can please access them from the Hawaii Train. Those links are being dropped by my wonderful team in the chat. And then if you would like to just see them, they're available on YouTube. We will send out all of these links. If you're not capturing them in the chat, that's okay. We send out a toolkit after this, a Mahalo email with all of the resources and links and everything that we talked about today. So you will get them, no worries. And then last thing, so we have an evaluation form, as I mentioned in the chat earlier. If you work for any federal programming, you know how important evaluation is to continue to get funds to do this kind of work. So we ask everybody to please give us our feedback. This is required if you would like CEUs, but even if you are not doing this for CEUs, we would still really love to hear from you and what you love, what you maybe didn't love, what you missed, what you wish we did, all of those great things, so that we can continue to grow and do this work together. All right, and lastly, we have our upcoming webinar dates. Again, we have this really like nonstop summer series going on right now. I think we have multiple webinars a week. And so just so much knowledge coming out right now. And we have Wednesday, we have the part 3. We have Keali here who opened for us. And so she'll be doing the part 3 of her curriculum on Wednesday, July 19 from 10 to 11:30 a.m. And then on Thursday, the next day, July 20th, we hear from our from other members of our lab here on the patient and practitioner empowerment through artificial intelligence. And so if you can make either one of those or both of them, that would be great. And now I will pass back to Carolann to close this out for this webinar. So this is Mossy.
Thank you, Sami. To close our webinar today, we recite this poem that was written in companionship with the Oceans of Reflection mural entitled O Micronesia Keia. This is Micronesia in Olelo, Hawaii. If you've heard this poem before, I invite you to say it along with me as I recite it, so that can be your pule for the day as well. O Micronesia Keia. As navigators, it is our destiny to at some point leave home in pursuit of opportunity to create for our descendants a better life than we've known. O Micronesia Keia, stories carried across oceans of fishermen who chase rivermen, where we pound our food with coral and lava rocks and make magic potions. O Micronesia Keia, when ocean peoples become landlocked, we lose our depth perception. We can no longer see ourselves in ourselves, so we search for the oceans of reflection. O Micronesia Keia, we remember the story-laden garments we were taught to sew by Native Hawaiian missionaries into our mumu, uros, and skato. Losing sight of histories no longer etched in skin, blood once drawn in liberation, now quantified and weaponized to delegitimize and destabilize indigenous, sovereign nations. O Hawaii Keia, where navigation found its way home, Papa Mau reminding every single one of us of our shared kumulipo. O Hawaii Keia, where navigators find themselves off course, but together, just like the little goby, we can help each other return to our source. It is in community with each other where we learn how to tell our stories again, finding all the things we thought we'd lost, mirrored in our new friends. Hands reaching across a canvas of orange and blue, our stories merged and emerged into each other's oceans. We found ourselves immersed as tears turned watercolor, baptizing lenses in ancestral salt water. We found ourselves in each other. O Hawaii Keia, this is Hawaii, where we lay our heads at night, where we struggle to see ourselves in ourselves. So we look to our left and to our right. O Hawaii Keia, home of the Ahu that looks like bay, stone altar, mirrored across oceans in praise of Keakua, of Anilap, the struggles our ancestors endured the same. We are each other's liberation. Alive in this pai'aina, we will free each other again. Kalangan, Sizus Maasi, Kiliso Chapur, Kulo Mulalap, Sulang, Kamagar, Mahalo. Mahalo everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we finished 4 minutes early because Micronesian time is on time.
Yay.